Lokawua, permanent expert member for the United Nations from Uganda, Africa. So she'll be up to speak now. So, Margaret. Also, could we get you guys to put your cell phones on vibrate so they don't go off during the rest of the session, please? Oh, you don't? Oh, that's not yours? Okay.
I'm not going to use this. Good morning, everybody. I can see everybody's face is very bright, trying to listen to Margaret. Mata noi, mata ngatuk, mata keksel, mato yakat, mata juijui. I bring greetings from elders of my region, my indigenous tribe. They bring you blessings, spiritual guidance, and safe stay here, and good thoughts. My name is Margaret Lokawua, an indigenous leader from Uganda. My indigenous tribe is Karamojong, who are basically pastoralists. They have lived in the land for more than 1,000 years. I was a member of the Permanent Forum, and that's when I had a privilege to work with one of our departed sisters, Tonya. And that is how I met the wonderful leadership of the 7th Generation Fund, to whom I am grateful to have given me an opportunity always to share great experiences and learn new ideas. In today's discussion, I've been asked to talk about women's leadership and well-being in Uganda. And so I thought it was very important to look at the overview of indigenous peoples before I go to that. I don't know if it's okay with you. These are the obvious things that we know as indigenous peoples. And it's a fact that there are about 370 million indigenous peoples living in 70 countries, practicing different cultures. But what is unique about these indigenous people is that they're always marginalized. They're always excluded from certain discussions. Their land is always taken, development takes in their land without their consent. So that is the similarity that we have as indigenous peoples, and I'm happy the previous speakers, most of them have highlighted the same which I know and I think is true. Don't you think it's true? It is true. The beauty of it is that international organizations, international community, over the recent years has recognized how important indigenous people are. And so it's been so good that there have been so many instruments, conventions, treaties. There are so many that I can't name them, that have always emphasized issues of indigenous peoples, issues of indigenous women. We have the ILO Convention 107. We have the ILO Convention 109, which talks about the lands of indigenous peoples. No development should take place without the consultation of indigenous peoples, which I think is a very pretty good thing that the international community over many years has come to understand issues of indigenous peoples. Of course, we have the mighty Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the UN DRIP. This has emphasized a lot of issues concerning indigenous peoples. I know this took about 20 years before it came to place in 2007. The declaration establishes a vital standard for eliminating human rights violations against indigenous peoples worldwide. And so this is something that we must be proud of. And further, Article 22 of the same declaration now talks about women. It talks about women, which is a very good thing. And we've got so many declarations, and I even imagine in our own states or countries, our constitutions talk about women. In my case, in my country where I come from, Uganda, our constitution also talks about women. It says women have a right to education, women have a right to equal opportunities. And then you come to customary laws, natural laws, we talked about them yesterday. But the beauty of it is that the indigenous peoples had this. These were unwritten laws. They had that. Respect, friendship, unity, promotion of values, and so forth. Now, the question is, if all these articles, conventions, constitutions have been talking about indigenous women, in a reality of today, are indigenous women enjoying, or they are still having challenges? In our own communities, in our own states, of course. That's why we are here. We still have a lot of challenges. It is up to us. And I thank the Seventh Generation Fund for bringing lawyers to call this Get Conference of Lawyers, and also us indigenous peoples. For sure, to me, I'm very excited because I have learned a lot of things. Oh, I wish what we have learned should go down and be implemented. Something can come out. And this is a conference of hope, knowledge, of aspiration. It motivates us. And I'm sure by the end of these 3 days, we shall all go home when we are different persons with energy. That is what I think. And I'm sure that's also what you think. Now, that was my introductory part. Let me talk now about my own experience about the leadership and girls in my own community. You know, women and girls take very hard tasks in families. For example, women and girls in my community take up leadership roles in their households. You know, I told you that I come from a pastoralist community. Now, men go and take cows to look for pasture because my land is dry. It's a semi-arid area. And so women and children are left to take care of families, which is a very hard thing, because the mother has to ensure that She provides food for the children. She takes this child to the hospital. You know, she goes and gets firewood for cooking. It looks simple, but when you look at it all, it's a very hard task. And so I uphold all the indigenous women. I'm sure every indigenous woman in our community does so. The other role that women do is they are custodian of traditional knowledge. You know, they know which medicine treats what. And they know which tree should not be cut. Even if when they go to go and cut firewood, they know this one must be spared because it treats these diseases. And that's why how we have lived for generations. And today, most of my indigenous women prefer traditional medicine than going to hospitals because it works. We believe in it. And more so when these indigenous women go to hospital, they are being marginalized. They say you are indigenous. First of all, you are not dressed well. We don't know what you are suffering from. And so, for us, 80% of the population still relies on traditional medicine. And people live longer and they get treated. Much others think it's primitive. It's not. So I think that is something that me as an indigenous woman, I am proud of, and I uphold my culture. Education, traditional education is promoted by indigenous women through songs, through rhymes, through poems. That is how we pass knowledge in our communities. Each song has got a meaning. So it's not just a mere song, it has a meaning. Each rhyme has got a meaning. And so we are used to it. And I'm sure even other communities still practice it. You know, women come together in the evening, sit around fireplace, and so they tell stories through songs. They tell stories through rhymes. And that is what has kept our communities. Through such, there's bonding, there's relationship. And so it is very hard to penetrate through such a community which has its own modes of communication. And so that is why it is very important that each indigenous community maintains their own language. That is the beauty of it. If you don't know your language, then I'm sorry, you may not be an indigenous person. Be serious. So that is how we get our education. Power, you know, we have got power, we have got power giving to the next generation. That's what we do. Our grandmothers, at the age of 80, 70, give power to the next generation of women in a very powerful ceremony, of which these women are given power to decide, given power to train the next generation. That is how our societies have lived. And so you find that for a society to stay for a long time, for so many years, has to maintain its own language, maintain its mode of communication. These are traditional values that all of us know. And to break such a society is very difficult. And if a child is brought in such a society, will he grow up with respect? Will he grow up knowing that this is my brother, this is my clan, these are my relatives. These are the values which were not written, but we practice them. And the foreigner thinks that you are ignorant. You are not. Because you have stayed for 100 years, you're practicing your language, you know how to make disputes, to settle disputes. You know how to bring people together. We've got very many ceremonies. Women play a vital role in marriage ceremonies. They play a vital role in making sure that the family name is alive. They give names. And the spirit of your ancestor goes to that child. The family name keeps alive. You can know this is my relative when you meet, even if you have not been told the name, because the family name stays. Those are some of the leadership roles women and girls take. I'm sure even in some other communities, it's the same. Now, these are very nice things I've told you. And now I'm sure you can imagine, oh, this community is really living in a paradise. It's not true. I'm going to tell you the other negative side. Now, as a woman, looking at all these roles that women take, you know, taking care of children, taking them to hospital, attending, you know, mothers who are traditional birth attendants, making sure that the child is delivered well, taking care of the environment. And yet, you realize that the place is semi-arid, we don't have rain, poor methods of cultivation, there's no food. Looking at all that, definitely there must be challenges. And you realize that some of these challenges are that because the girl child is not able to go to school, because they are forced to take the leadership role when they are young, the community thinks it's not important that a girl should go to school. And maybe you may ask, if they don't go to school, then why are you speaking the second language? Somebody would ask. I could be one of the hundreds. There are many who have never gone to school because a girl is not supposed to go to school. It's a challenge. She starts doing work of an adult at the age of 6 years. And so you find there are so many young mothers who are supposed to be children, they are mothers. And so the baby and the child are all children. And so that's a very huge challenge. And sometimes it may not be the fault of either the parents, because they cannot afford. They cannot afford to take these children to school. And so in such a situation, what happens? Of course, poverty. So there are problems. It's a cycle of vicious poverty. It rotates on and on. Those are some of the challenges. Some other challenges I would talk about is that women are not given the chance to decide. No. They are not given a chance to talk in public meetings like these ones. They are not supposed to. They are supposed to listen, passive listeners. Whether it is wrong, you say yes. Whether it's going to endanger your life, because young kids are given out for marriage at a tender age, you say yes. Whether it's going to harm your health. Because I know of some indigenous people who practice female genital mutilation. So the child is handed to that because she's a girl, she has to say yes. So you can see the hardship amidst the rosy things that I said, that the woman faces as a challenge in Africa. And in my community, actually, health services are very far. Because of global warming, those days we used not to have a lot of complicated diseases. No. I remember one of my great-great-parents lived for a long time because of traditional medicine. But these days, there have come diseases that are beyond the community's management. And because the health center is about 80 kilometers, what happens? So this mother is supposed to take a patient to that, no transport, you walk. So you expect something which is very dangerous. So health services is what is a challenge to these women. Domestic violence, because the mother is not supposed to get food, especially when the fathers come back after so many times from where they have taken heads of cattle to graze. If the mother is not able to give food, what happens? Domestic violence. And because the whole community is not knowledgeable about human rights, does not know about the law, so it becomes very difficult. I don't know whom we should blame at this time. Is it, can we blame fathers? Can we blame mothers? So those are some of the challenges that our communities, I imagine so many communities face. And so when you look at these challenges, of course, you could think of so many solutions. And that is why, for example, in 2002, I was a teacher. I left teaching. I went to form this Indigenous organization where I coordinate. Because when you look at the community, it has a lot of challenges, of which challenges we're able to do on voluntary basis. I wish there were so many people with good hearts who could do that. Because we always want to do something because we want to be paid. And I even imagine this is something that we, all of us, should take. I know once we read a lot, we say, I cannot waste time for nothing. Everything must be paid. No. But if we look at our values and cultures, our relationship, there are certain things that you must do at your own will, with your own heart. And if all of us had that kind of heart, it would make a lot of difference. Don't you think so? But now we are saying, I cannot waste my time. I should work to be paid. Yes, because the world is changing. The colonizers brought a lot of things to us. They brought bad ideas to our heads, that you must work to be paid. And yet before, our ancestors used to work without being paid. Why don't we try to bring some values in us? Let's make values in us so that we truly live as we used to live. Of course, I know there are some circumstances that may want you to do certain things that may be out of your own will. But I know as indigenous peoples, let us stick to our principles, promote our values, so that our generations, the next generations to come, will still continue with the same spirit. It's like a child growing and sees a bad parent. Because your first teachers are your parents. If you don't see your parents doing something good, eventually you don't do it better. And I think we can always make a change. Those are some few thoughts I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much.
Good, good. See, we're always pointing back to our traditional value systems in one way or another. You know, it's good to always remember that. Those are our basic laws that we always need to point back to. We never push that aside. We should always put that first. Okay, our next speaker is Tamara Starblanket. And she's from the Cree Nation, Six Nations territory, so she'll be speaking next.
Pardon me, I have to turn on my I want to say good morning to everyone here. My name is Jopiki Quayle. My spirit name is Spider Woman. I come from a Takaku Cree Nation in Treaty 6 territory. I'm a Nehio Quayle, and I'm here today to talk about genocide, but first I'd like to give thanks to the Seventh Generation Fund for your hard work, and the elders that said their prayers here throughout the duration of this conference, and I want to give thanks to the original people of this land, this territory, the Achuman and Tongva people of this original territory, the original people of this territory. Can somebody turn on the PowerPoint, please? I'm not sure how to get this. Hi, can I get a technical person to help me turn on the PowerPoint? Thank you. So I just want to begin with briefly talk about my Master of Laws dissertation. My background is in law, and I recently defended and completed a Master of Laws dissertation on the legal question of genocide and the forcible transferring of Indigenous people's children into present times with the child welfare system, the residential schools. And the legal question that I examined in my research was whether the Canadian state is culpable for genocide. What I found in my research is I found two things. That first of all, the state of Canada violates customary laws on genocide. And the second finding that I made was that the state is criminally culpable for crimes of genocide. There's not enough time to address all particular details of what my master's dissertation is about, but I will discuss the second point pertaining to the state culpability for crimes of genocide, Canadian state culpability. Sharon Ben, a Cree international lawyer and scholar, has stated and wrote in a book that genocide is genocide, no matter what form it takes and no matter what you call it. And this statement, these words are foundational to the presentation that I'm making today, because language matters. Language has the effect to conceal, and I know this as a lawyer, that language can trap us. And in fact, I think Mr. Stephen Newcomb would agree with me that language does have the ability to trap our original nation. And some of the challenges that I endured while I was writing my dissertation were many. It took 7 long years to complete the work. I had challenge after challenge, but the one that I would like to discuss today is the one pertaining to understanding genocide. I knew when I undertook this work that I needed to understand it completely. I needed to be very careful and considerate of the future generations when I was making writing and doing my researching and drafting up the legal arguments that I made. And so the first challenge I had was a committee that fought me every step of the way. I had to fight on almost every point that, and I can't get into all of that, but what that amounts to is the genocide denial that continues to dominate our discussion in this colonial society today. And so that was the first challenge. The second challenge is this issue or the concept of cultural genocide. Insofar as framing the legal issues within this manner, because cultural genocide is not a crime in international law. So issues of cultural genocide were concealed under a human rights framework because the concern was that so-called legitimate efforts of assimilation might be deemed to be criminal. And this information that I'm sharing with you actually comes from the UN Convention, the Lokawua Preparatory, and that details the discussions of the Genocide Convention from 1946 to 1948. And I don't have a lot of time to get into that, but what I want to highlight from that is that it showed that Canada, among many other states, were instrumental in deleting this concept. So I knew that that was an issue as well that I needed to grasp and understand and attempt to get around. That I couldn't make a claim like this in my own research. I couldn't identify the harm as a cultural genocide. The next issue that, oh yes, and one more point on this, the deletion of cultural genocide was an attempt to render us invisible on our Great Turtle Island. It was an attempt to render Indigenous nations and peoples invisible all over Mother Earth in this world. Because in my view, it was an attempt to block any future claims that the original nations of this continent might make with respect to our collective experience of colonial invasion and domination. And they knew that because there was a colonial clause debate when the Genocide Convention was being drafted. And that was part of deconstructing the colonial framework under which the forcible transferring of children occurred. And you can see that at that international level, colonialism matched cultural genocide, and this is why they took it out. And part of the thing is that the United Kingdom had territories all over the world. So they would be instrumental, along with Canada, was a colony of Great Britain, and others that were instrumental in deleting this concept as a crime. Another central challenge is the language. We as nations have been forced to speak and think and write in a language that is not even ours. Language is fundamental to our experience of colonialism. In fact, Stephen Newcomb, in his groundbreaking work on the Domination Code, supports this point. Present-day Indigenous nations and peoples of this hemisphere are now compelled to utilize the language and conceptual system of the dominating society as a means of thinking, speaking, and writing about our own existence, while challenging certain negative, oppressive, and dominating concepts that have been mentally and from an Indigenous perspective illegitimately imposed on our existence. It was understood early on in the drafting and the researching of my work that framing the legal issue with euphemisms would be a detriment against our nation. The apology by the Canadian state in 2008 refers to words like abuse, mistreatment, and neglect. And in the case of the residential school system, Roland Christian, Michael Moran, and Sherry Young in the Circle Game termed the use of the language in this manner as word game or rhetoric. So neglect is an understatement of the intent to destroy. Abuse is an understatement of torture. Words have the ability to conceal our experiences less than genocide. So to address the challenges of language and genocide denial, I developed a model that explains genocide from an Indigenous standpoint. The model explains through metaphors a forced indoctrination process through the methods employed by the colonizer to force our children to speak and think and write in the language that was imposed on our existence as the original nations and peoples of our Great Turtle Island and other regions of Mother Earth. Examples of domination and dehumanization include torture, forced labor, sexual predatory acts, forced starvation, and death by disease and dilapidated living conditions. And these will no doubt compel the children to speak and think and write in the language that was forcibly imposed against them. Throughout the history of the residential school system, and now today with the present-day child welfare system, we have stories, a massive and widespread experience, stories, accounts of being shackled, chained, whipped, beat, having dry ice on the tongue from the U.S. experience, inserting needles through the tongue to force children not to speak their own original language. And in my view, when that happens to a child as young as that age, that will no doubt compel them to think and speak and write in that colonial language. The Canadian state violates Article 2B and E of the Genocide Convention. The forcible transferring of children from one group to another group causes the collective serious and bodily and mental harm against our children. Now, to go back to that model that I explained early on, it's called the model of domination and dehumanization, and of the indigenous peoples of the world. And what this explains through metaphors, it describes a forced indoctrination process. There's an elder back home in my territory that was concerned about young people not speaking and writing in our languages, and his concern was that this was brainwashing. And I thought at that time, when I heard him talk at that treaty meeting, I thought that that's how I would frame the experience. And then later on down the road, I had the great privilege of meeting a Mr. late Miguel Alfonso Martinez, and he explained the experience of colonialism around the world as demonization, isolation, and destruction. And I knew then at that point that I would describe our experience of genocide using that. But I didn't understand completely that I had developed a metaphor. It didn't dawn on me that I had developed a metaphor until I read Mr. Stephen Newcomb's work. And I have to share that his work was very instrumental to proving crimes of genocide, because I understood that in this process that I'd developed a tool, a powerful way to compel the Western reader to view the destruction against our children from our perspective. That when they got through the thesis or the reading of it, they had to concede that genocide had taken place. And this model does this. This model describes the harm that the children experience. And so when you do this, children who have endured this kind of harm over successive generations, it wasn't just one generation. These were opened in the late 1800s, and they continued on until the last one closed in 1996. I mean, it hasn't stopped. It's still going on with the child welfare system. But this is important because our spiritual languages are encoded, our spiritual laws are encoded in our languages. And that we have names in our languages that identify land on our territory. We have name, in our Cree language, I'm told, I don't speak it fluently. It's a spiritual language. And that children that have experienced this kind of domination and dehumanization will enter out of those institutions with the inability to speak and think and write in their own original language, and be able to do their ceremonies on the land, and to be able to exist as a nehio, or with as a Oneida, as a Newhawk, as all the many different original nations on Great Turtle Island, that we're so diverse that, you know, people call us Indian and all these different terminologies that are applied against us, but that's who we are. That we are these original nations that, and I heard over and over throughout this conference over the last few days that our natural laws, our creator's laws, that those original laws and instructions, I'm told by my elders, are how we need to be responsible and live up to our obligations. So that's why this is genocide, because it's all about the land, our Mother Earth. And it's a crime of genocide, because what do we depend on for our future generations? We depend on our children. And the Travaux Preparatoires supports that part of my legal argument, because they admitted right in there that forcibly transferring children would cause them to be enemies of their own people. That it would not just cause physical harm, but cultural harm. And so that's why these things are important. And in my view, if we understand what happened to us, that we can do something about it, and understand the importance of the things, the very important principles and laws that our elders have talked about at this gathering, and that our elders talk about in our communities and our homes, that where our Mother Earth is our mother. And so to get on to this proving genocide, another challenge that I had was the high threshold of specific intent, because you have to show that you intended to harm the people or the group the way, like, for example, causing serious and bodily and mental harm. You have to show that you intended to harm them that way, but you also have to show that you intended to harm the group. And so there's two levels of specific intent, which in my view is dominating and dehumanizing as well. But regardless, I was still able to show that they violated the Genocide Convention, using their own laws against them, because, for one, the case law around the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and the Yugoslavia Criminal Tribunal, that they talk about the experience being massive. If it's massive and widespread, and you have specific intent. If you have, you can also use general political doctrine. And so these are the policy statements made by government officials at that time. And I have many examples in my research of these policy statements and laws. It's the laws that compel the forcible transferring. But let me refer you to John A. Macdonald's address to the House of Commons in 1883. And when he said that when the school is on the reserve, the child lives with its parents who are savages. He is surrounded by savages, and though he may learn to read and write, his habits and training and mode of thought are Indian. He is simply a savage who can read and write. It has been strongly impressed upon myself as head of the Department of Indian Affairs that the Indian children should be withdrawn as much as possible from the parental influence. And the only way to do that would be to put them in central training industrial schools where they will acquire the habits, modes, and thoughts of white men. So that supports what I was showing in my research, is that the forcible transferring causes the collective serious and bodily and mental harm. So when you look at in the metaphor, it explains, Roland Kirchhoff talks about a total institution where the child becomes unmade and then remade in the way that the colonizer intended our people through that destruction. And so this total institution explains, according to Roland Kirchhoff, from an Indigenous perspective, the harm that happened against Indigenous people's children in those places. So they come out forcibly indoctrinated, unable to relate to the land, their identity, and I can share that because I'm a survivor of that experience. However, it was my my ceremonies and my culture to save my life. So I know that what I'm saying is true. That even though this has been a horrific experience for our children, our people, that I believe that we can overcome these things if we understand what is happening. And part of the problem is the society, because the society cannot conceive that what they do is destructive. They can't conceive that they are destructive in the way that they behave. And I'll give you an example. Dr. Peter Bryce in 1907 came out with a report damning the government for the atrocious death rates of children in those institutions. And the society and the government did absolutely nothing about it at that time, and this was in 1907. So today, you know, when people talk about responsibility and obligation, the colonial or the non-Indigenous person is also responsible as well. To get real with yourself and acknowledge what you've done and stop the genocide. You know, part of, you know, when you're doing a master's dissertation or a PhD, you're supposed to have solutions. And that really, in a simple way, was what I was referring to, is that all genocide in its various forms must stop. If we're to have peace on this earth, those things they brought over from the other side of the world, these are the things that I'm talking about. For it to be okay to do that to innocent children, there's something wrong with that. So I'm going to close off with my own little story. I'm the last person in my family of birth. I have family, my family of birth that I grew up with. They passed on from the things that I wrote about in my parents and my grandparents attended residential schools. And but I'm standing here today, and I'm alive because learning this has been more healing than anything I've ever done for myself. So I know that the truth heals. I heard elders talk about that. The truth does heal. So I'm very thankful to the elders, and again to Seventh Generation Fund for asking me to come and present this work here today. And hi, can I speak to me?
We'd like to invite Margaret back up too if there's any questions. And I don't know if we have a mic. Can we get a mic? Okay, we got mics here for the presenters as well.